Good evening, everybody. Um, I know that things are not looking the best as far as how hopeful we all were that the Canes were going to have a really, really good free agency. I'm not totally giving up hope yet, but I've always told you guys I'm a straight shooter about the team. If I think someone's playing poorly or if I think someone's playing well, if someone's getting just or unjust criticism, I'm going to say so. So, two things can be true at once. One, I think it's too early to judge how all this is going to turn out. There have been times where this front office, whether Tulski's the GM or Waddell's the GM, that they have surprised us. If you want an example from a long time ago, Nino Niederreiter for Victor Rask. More recently, of course, the Mikko Rantanen trade that ultimately didn't work out the way that they planned. Still got a bunch of draft assets and got a really damn good player in Logan Stankoven. That being said, there is absolutely nothing wrong with kind of assessing the situation as it is right now and saying that it is not looking the greatest. Now, another thing to consider with that, and me and my friends over on Caniac Sessions, Caniac Report, we have a chat that we're all in and we talk every day. The league has been kind of seemingly clamping down on stuff coming out the night before free agency, and I'm kind of glad that they are. The reason being that I'm happy about that is because it kind of got to the point where, is it really Christmas if you open your presents a day early or 2 days early? It's really not. And I remember last free agency, Brett Pesce, everyone knew he was going to New Jersey the day before July 1st, or so June 30th, I'll say, because that's what it is. Everyone knew about Brady Shea going to Nashville the day before. That cat was pretty much already out of the bag. I remember seeing stuff about Steph Nason as early as the 29th on him going back to New Jersey, and there's a multitude of other things. So I'm kind of glad the league is kind of clamping that down. However, there is also the aspect of it that kind of makes anxious fans like we are right now a little bit more anxious. So there's that to consider. But I'm really glad that they're maybe getting a hold of this stuff coming out early. Now, you guys have noticed lately, my friend Matthew has come on these streams, Matthew P., who, if you don't follow him on X, the likeliness is you do if you follow me. If you don't follow him on X, he posts some really good stuff. Primarily, the thing that he posts the most about that, like the biggest reason I like having him as an asset and like talking to him is he is really on top of the prospect stuff. And potentially he'll be doing some future stuff on the website depending on how his schedule works out because, he's married, he's got kids, he's got a life outside of this. So one idea that he had, and we were talking about it on the watch party during the draft, was one, the decentralized draft things needs to never happen again. That's gonna be its own video because I can go on for an hour about how bad that was. If it wasn't for Matthew and Sam and all of us being able to have some good laughs, I would have fallen asleep. If I wasn't doing that watch party, I would have been passed out. And if they, for some reason, continue to do that format next year, I will not be going live until the Canes pick. So, because that was just brutal. But one idea he had was if you make free agency kind of like the draft, when it's centralized, when the GMs are all in the same spot, the dealer's floor, if you will. Have that for the free agents as well. And basically where the free agents show up, their representation shows up and have to talk to all the GMs all at once of anybody who they could potentially make an offer to, everything like that. So essentially it becomes kind of an auction at that point. And then you can have draft, free agency, all this stuff at one location during the week. I actually really like that idea. The problem is the National Hockey League will never do anything like that because it's a rational decision. It makes sense. It would probably save money because you would just have to get one venue for a few days. You could maybe move the date of free agency up, something along those lines, and you can have that all at once. And then you make a strict rule. You can talk, or I wouldn't say even a strict rule, but you can say, hey, if you want to reach out to someone who's a pending UFA and it's June 26th and not July 1st, you can talk to them. You can ask them for terms, but they can't sign anything. You can even have a pre-contractual agreement in place if you want, but no signatures, No official finalized documentation, none of that stuff. And if you do anything you shouldn't do, you lose. You could have almost like an offer sheet type of table to it. If you do this, you lose this draft pick, and this draft pick, or you get fined this much money. Something along those lines would mitigate a lot of these things. Now, another thing that I would like to comment on, the fact that tampering apparently now is a problem because one of the original 6 teams got fucked with by the National Hockey League's other, no pun intended, golden child in Vegas, who can do whatever the fuck they want transactionally and face no consequences whatsoever. Now, all of a sudden, it's a problem. Additionally, deferred salary is coming out of the new collective bargaining agreement, and I guarantee you it would not have been a problem if the Carolina Hurricanes had not used it on Jaccob Slavin and to a much greater degree Seth Jarvis's contracts. So truth be told, it's not what you do, it's who you are. And the NHL is not nearly bad about that as other leagues are. Look at the MLB. I love the MLB, but as far as corruption, it's way worse than the NHL. I don't watch the NBA, but if I was really interested in basketball, which I'm not, I would strictly probably watch the Heels play all the time. And I really only watch them during March Madness, and that's also occasional because hockey is on. So, but the NBA is really fucking corrupt. People talk about the whole idea of the NHL having a luxury tax. I think that's a bad idea. Now, the state income sales tax adjustment, I don't think is a horrible idea. So I could go much deeper into that, but then this would inevitably get political, and that's not what this channel is about. But what I will say is that is an issue, and only Florida, Tampa, teams that are in no state income tax states can pull this off. There's a reason why they're able to pull off what they did today, where they got Ekblad, Marchand both signed after they got Sam Bennett done. Now, there's also an element to that Aaron Ekblad took a pay cut. He could have went to the open market and easily got somewhere between $8 and $9 million a season. Jaccob Slavin, additionally, even though he was nowhere close to free agency and, we were never worried about him leaving the Hurricanes anyway, he could have said 8, and that would have been a done deal. It would have been signed right there. He took 6.43 because he's a team player. He's a leader. And honestly, he's one of those guys that you can tell his faith very, very much reflects his values. And he says he doesn't, he said something along the lines one time of, I don't play hockey for me, I play hockey for God. So he's one of those guys that, he wants to make enough money to live comfortably and support his family. And he should, because he has a job that very few people on this planet can do. But he managed to take a pay cut, maintain humility, and set himself up for the rest of his life. And I would not be surprised if at the end of that contract, he decides to play a little bit longer, because I can still see Jaccob Slavin being all gray hair, 43 years old, and being a third pair shutdown defenseman penalty killer for the Hurricanes when that time comes. But he's not lost a step at all, and that's absolutely nothing to worry about. Now, as far as what options the Canes have remaining go, there ain't a whole lot out there. Now, I annoyed some people. Well, I won't say annoyed. We just had a disagreement about it. I had a disagreement with some people in regards to Granlund. I said that Granlund was a great two-way player. Okay, maybe he's not great, but I think he's good. He's solid. People forget, I think, because Nashville is actually one of the teams I watch a lot when I'm not watching the Canes. Nashville, when he played there, he was actually pretty good at the two-way side of the game. Now, I'm not so much talking about the defensive aspect of things, but as far as being a possession driver and a playmaker, Granlund is pretty good at those things, even though he's a little bit on the slower side. And he's not that big. But fact of the matter is the Canes are running out of options. The Sabres, I don't think they're going to trade Tage Thompson unless they have just an abysmal start and he wants out. Same thing goes for Dylan Larkin. I would take either one of those guys in a heartbeat. EP40, I don't see that happening either, and there's some skepticism about how well he would fit. But at the same time, a lot of people who are skeptical of Elias Pettersson playing for the Hurricanes would take Jesperi Kotkaniemi out back and shoot him if they had the chance. And as much as I like KK, and I'm not, the biggest EP40 fan, I'm not going to pretend for a second that Jesperi Kotkaniemi is a better player than Elias Pettersson. Now, contract-wise, I think you get a little bit more out of Kotkaniemi than you do out of Pettersson. He had that 100-point season, and he's never replicated it since. Would he replicate it with the Canes? I don't think so. I don't see Carolina being able to bring in a center that would put in more points than Aho unless it's Tage Thompson or Dylan Larkin. Now, maybe they could still look at Mason McTavish, but it sounds like it sounds like that Anaheim is making moves. They did move Zegras out, but them moving Zegras out makes me think maybe they're not going to give McTavish up so easily if they were to give him up, or maybe they won't give him up at all. Anaheim, for as bad as they were last season, if their special teams were better, because 5-on-5, they were actually pretty good. If their special teams were a little bit better, they probably squeeze into the playoffs, or at least they're not eliminated from it at the last minute. So there's that to consider. And maybe you have an option there. Pius Suter's name has been thrown around. I don't know a whole hell of a lot about Pius Suter, so I'm not going to comment on whether he would be the perfect guy for that. However, he did have 46 points this past season, and he wasn't really on my radar personally. Maybe you have an option there. If you have to give him an Orlov-type contract, that feels more of an... So when the Hurricanes signed Orlov to $7.75 million for 2 years, it was a stopgap thing until Nikishin got here. But at the time, and I understand that rationale, but at the same time, that wasn't really a need in my opinion, because they already had Shea, they already had Pesce. I know that Shea's contract was expiring and it was looking less and less like he was going to come back, and ultimately he did not. But I think that that's one of those times where maybe they could have considered a different course of action as opposed to a heavy AAV low-term contract. When you're talking about the second-line center situation that the Canes have, that is much more of a situation where you would throw, say, $7 million, which is a big overpayment for Pius Suter, in my opinion, what little bit I know about him. But someone's probably going to throw that money at him that needs a center. That's a situation where you say, hey, Pius Suter, here's $6.5-7 million a season for the next 2 years. And if you prove that you got what it takes, you can stick around a little bit longer potentially. So Carolina's kind of backed into a corner as far as that goes. Now, right-handed defenseman, I saw something earlier. It was either from NHL Rumors, Puck Report, or Darren Dreger or someone like that. News has been all over the place today for as ultimately uneventful things have been so far, and anticlimactic as far as for the Hurricanes. Apparently, Rasmus Andersson does really, really want to go to Vegas. And if they can make that happen, then he's off the table for the Canes and he's down to their last option. I know I'm going to upset some people with this, but you guys already know what my other right-handed defenseman solution is, because not every single player on the team needs to be a avid 200-foot kill or an average 200-foot player who kills penalties and eats the other team's power play for breakfast all the time. There needs to be a couple of outliers. I'm not saying that they don't have to be cogs in the machine and they don't have to pull their weight, but Tony DeAngelo would have hit 60 points with Slavin a couple of seasons ago if he didn't get hurt. And none of the problems that he was allegedly having when Carolina signed him the very first time occurred while he was in Carolina or anywhere else. Meanwhile, Alexander Georgiev threatens his teammates on the ice, and absolutely nothing is said about that. So that's another thing to consider. Now, this leads to the next option, which is where I think the front office's head is really at, is bringing Brent Burns back. If that happens, and I'm not saying for a second I'm for that, but if that does happen, you run a couple of risks with it, but you also have a couple of benefits from it. If you bring Brent Burns back, one, you already know what you're getting for the most part. He might lose another step during the season. That's a distinct possibility. You might be able to put him with Gostisbehere. He did attempt to transform his game into more of a shutdown defenseman type of role, which he did to some degree succeed at, not as much as we would have liked. But you could potentially put him with Gostisbehere and have that be your third pair. Here's my concern with that. I think that experiment will last about a day. And I think that Burns would be right back with Slavin and the defense would be right back to the configuration that it was at last season. That's where I have a concern with that. Now, as far as that goes, there are worse options out there than Brent Burns. Erik Karlsson would not make it playing for the Canes. Now, a lot of people have this thing about Erik Karlsson saying, well, he's not good defensively, he's lazy, all this other stuff. And that's true to some degree. But Erik Karlsson is not lazy or looks slow because he's lazy. Erik Karlsson had a surgery where they basically removed half of his ankle. So when you can't push off really quick and you can't take a step like you used to, because Erik Karlsson has some of the most seamless transitions on skates and effortless looking stride that I've ever seen. for a player. When he played in Ottawa, he was pretty solid defensively. He was probably at times he was the best two-way defenseman in the game, and he brought a ton of offense. He definitely leaned towards the offensive side, but he wasn't a slouch defensively. He was passable. The reason that that's not there anymore is injury related. It's not because he's lazy. I think a lot of times when people see players that are very effortless in their skating because of how good he is at it, they perceive that as laziness, and that is just simply not true when it comes to him. That being said, I still ultimately think for the play style of the Canes, a player like Erik Karlsson will get burned and not have the speed to get back. And that's primarily because of the injury. So that's the other thing to consider with that. Now, I think that I think my other two options beyond that above Burns were Dante Fabbro and Henri Jokiharju. Both of those guys have extended with their respective teams, so both of them are off the table. So that does leave the Hurricanes in a bit of a position. Now, you do have one other option there. If you bring Burns back, you can trade Gostisbehere. You could potentially do a one-for-one trade where you move him out and bring a shutdown left-handed defenseman in to play with Burns. I think that that's a little bit too much. And people will say, well, if Ghost is gone, who's going to quarterback the power play? Would it be Nikishin? Yeah, probably. But I don't think that Nikishin is going to immediately get the keys to power play one. He'll probably start out on the second unit and probably with another defenseman before they do that, because he's still learning the ropes in the NHL. So putting him out there to quarterback power play one after camp, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that it wouldn't work, but that is a very big responsibility. And that if you're going to change your power play, the reason the power play quarterback is the last thing changed is because everything revolves around what the guy at the point is doing. So Nikishin might not get the keys to that immediately. So you might still need to have two other guys who could potentially quarterback the power play. So if you bring D'Angelo back or you bring Burns in, you got two guys that you can put on power play 2 and still have Gostisbehere on power play 1, however you want to configure things at 5-on-5. Now, part of the rationale of why Tony DeAngelo was traded to bring Brent Burns in, they wanted a full-time partner for Jacob Slavin who he could play 5-on-5 with and kill penalties with, so that way there's fluidity in the lines, there's familiarity in the lines, and you're going over the bench with the same guys as often as possible. That is as far as the Hurricanes go with the way Rod runs things. The defense, he typically leaves it alone, and I think that that's a good thing. It doesn't change much after camp. However, the forwards are constantly in a blender, and that's because the forward group that the front office has managed to put together thus far is not good enough. And I also had someone reply to something I said earlier. I said something along the lines of Sebastian Aho is probably going to be the most disappointed person tomorrow because he's not had that type of player that he needs since Gensel. Him and Svechnikov don't have a ton of chemistry, in my opinion, and I think Svechnikov is much better on the right side of the ice, which he doesn't see much time on. Him and Jarvis have unmatched chemistry, but he's constantly stapled to Stahl and Martinook in a lot of situations. So Aho has not had really good, consistent line mates for a long period of time. That's another issue. And someone took that as me taking a slight at Tulsky, and that's not what I was doing. Tulsky has no control over what Mitch Marner decided to do in moving to Vegas and getting moved to Vegas. He has no control over any other UFA or pending UFA that decides to stay with their respective team. I understand that. That doesn't mean that the guy is not allowed to be frustrated because he's a star player that's not insulated, and that makes it difficult for him to do his job. And then when you add in someone like Jake Gensel to the mix, as we saw with Aho, we saw how he took off when he finally had that type of player with him. Now, if you want to say that that's a deficiency in Aho's game, that's a completely unfair argument, in my opinion, because every single player in this league, Connor McDavid included, needs to be insulated by players that will complement them and that they have chemistry with. I will now get to some of the comments. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, even though I'm about to have another one. Thayer Creft, what's good? Hey, buddy, good to see you. Matthew P., what's up, pal? Apparently the GMs like the decentralized draft. God, no, I hope that I understand the GMs like it, but, what about the fans? Like, the fans need to probably like it because the fans are their customer base and that's where they get their money. So that's just out of touch on the GM's part if they did like it. Matthew P says that's a great idea in reference to the free agency, basically job fair. Yeah, I did like your idea about that. He also says Vegas cheated with Marner and the Leafs blackmailed Vegas into giving them Nicolas Waugh. Yeah, like I was saying at the opening of the show, essentially, Vegas is one of those teams that gets away with whatever they want. I don't know why. I know it's like Bettman's project every time a team moves to a non-traditional market, which I think is a old and tired term that needs to be thrown out anyway. Excuse me. That's one of those things where I'm kind of like, all right, well, Vegas just gets away with all those things. I mean, Mark Stone didn't conveniently get injured in February this season, but after a while, I'm just not going to believe it. And he did it, 3 times in a row where he got magically injured in February. And then there was, I think it was year before last, he just happened to get injured right when Jack Eichel came back. So the playoff salary cap, I'm glad that they're implementing something like that. I think that'll mitigate those things, but it won't stop them entirely. People are always going to try and find ways to cheat. And like I said, when the Houston Astros got caught with the sign stealing thing, they weren't the only ones doing it. They were just the ones who got caught. Guarantee you everybody's been doing that. The Chicago White Sox used to have a fence that moved 15 feet back, depending on if it was the top or the bottom of the inning. So, yeah, they weren't the only ones doing it. I guarantee you everybody was doing it. They just got caught. Caniac Sessions, make sure you tune into us tomorrow at 11 a.m. And can't wait to see Ehlers sign in Random Town USA tomorrow for $2 million less than Carolina's offer. Yeah, I'm worried about that happening. We are going to talk about Ehlers extensively here in a moment. Matthew P. says Corey Perry is going to market. He guarantee us a finals appearance and lose. He won once with Anaheim, so maybe we can break that curse. Evan Smith says a 6-year contract for a 37-year-old is crazy in reference to Marchand, I'm guessing. Yeah, and the other thing about that is I don't think that Marchand is going to play that entire time, and if he does, it wouldn't surprise me because, honestly, he doesn't look like he's slowed down at all. His game looks almost identical to what it was 10 years ago. So maybe eventually he'll lose the step. I mean, well, it's an inevitability. He will. But, excuse me, I've got the hiccups a little bit. His game just doesn't seem to have fallen off at all. And he's another one of those guys that he gets under your skin and he elevates his game in the playoffs. So when he's having to play against the same team over and over and over and over again, it gets really annoying to play against him, as we've seen from Carolina playing against them in the playoffs, or playing against him in the playoffs when he was playing for the Bruins, and then most recently the Panthers. So that's another thing. Maverick, what's up, buddy? Granlund would be a huge upgrade at 2C for us. Yes, Hurdle would have been preferred, but with Marner signed, Vegas doesn't need to move players for cap space right now. Yeah, that's true. Like I said about Granlund at the opening, I think that people are a little bit too hard on his two-way play. He's not the greatest guy defensively, but he does make a difference in terms of possession and playmaking. I'd rather the Hurricanes go get an offense first center that doesn't suck defensively, but that seems to be off the table right now. Reese Bailey, what's up, buddy? It seems the Canes are stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to addressing actual needs this summer. It sucks because it's not like Carolina did anything wrong necessarily. Yes, that is 100% correct. And that's why I was saying that Aho's going to be disappointed, but that was not an indictment or implication of Tulsi at all. He has absolutely no control of that situation. What he has control of tomorrow is putting out the offers that he needs to put out there at noon, but ultimately it's up to the player and their representation what happens with that. So, no, him and the front office have zero control past that. So that's why it's like I'd never said anything negative about Eric Tulsi. I think that considering last offseason looked more catastrophic than this one at first, and this one looks pretty bad so far. Everything turned out fine. A team that was, sitting there, a lot of us were sitting here wondering, fuck, are we going to make the playoffs? And then they went to the conference finals and finally won a game with a team that shouldn't have done it. Knocked off the first place seed in the Eastern Conference in 5 games. Now, I know I've said over and over again that Washington habitually has the easiest schedule in professional sports because they're right in the middle of the Eastern Conference. They never have any travel time. That's why they run it up during the regular season. They get to the playoffs, and with the exception of the one time they won the Cup, they never get past the second round. They get absolutely bitched. But, that's not a team that Carolina should have, on paper at least, knocked off in 5 games. B says, I always thought Larkin was a Michigander for life and wouldn't leave Detroit, but that's just a gut feeling. Yeah, since he's from there, I don't think he'd want to leave. I really don't. I think that things would have to get so bad in Detroit that he didn't see a way forward, and I don't think that they're there yet. Buffalo, on the other hand, Buffalo has been in the dumpster for a long time. So I think it's 14 years straight now that they've not made the playoffs. Thank you, Lord, because I hate the Sabres. But I would say that Tage is probably more of a possibility than Larkin, yes. But I don't see either of them as realistic possibilities at this moment. Both of them have been pipe dreams. Matthew P says, I'd much rather Granlund than Suter. Tony D is fine for a year. Yeah, I'm not saying to 8x8 Tony DeAngelo. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that we know from a previous, basically full season that he works. And even when he got stuck being the seventh defenseman, which was not the plan for him, because if anybody thinks that the plan was for Tony to be the seventh defenseman, you know nothing about how seventh defensemen work. One, seventh defensemen are not paid $1.6 million, especially not by our very conservative and outright, at times, frugal front office. But the second thing of that is seventh defensemen are typically like pretty defensively competent, like at the Chad Ruhwedel level, for example. Someone like that is a seventh defenseman. Tony's not that. He's a specialist. He's a role player. He's a power play quarterback, and he's an offensive defenseman. And when you give him top 4 minutes, he produces. And we've seen that already. Him and Slavin are yin and yang. They couldn't be very different players. But Slavin produced a lot that year with Tony as well. So it's not that bad of a deal, but we know why people actually don't like Tony DeAngelo, and it has nothing to do with hockey. Like, just being real about it. Kaniac Sessions says, can't wait to hear the We Like Our Group presser. Yeah, it's coming. Very much afraid it's coming. Maverick says Burns for 1 year isn't ideal, but he'll stay with Slavin if he comes back, in my opinion. Not at first. I think that they'll try Burns with Gostisbehere, because even Rod said he didn't want Burns playing with Slavin, but kind of didn't have a choice. I don't think that experiment's going to last very long. And I don't think you can put him with Nikishin either. Maybe they'll do that. I don't know. But I just foresee any instance that they bring Burns back has an inevitability of him ending back up with Slavin, just because something won't work somewhere and they'll go back to what they know kind of works, or it'll be the lesser of two evils at that point, whatever you want to call it. So Ile says Gavrikov would be a great pickup. Yeah, he would. He's left-handed though, right? That's the only thing. Hold up, let me look at something here. Yeah, Gavrikov's left-handed. That's the only thing about that. Friedman has us as a favorite to land Ehlers and maybe even below market value. That would help long-term. I'm going to extensively go into talking about Ehlers after I get through the rest of these comments. Snowman NC says, I think Stank will take Jarvis' spot with Marty and Jordan when Rod changes things up. That would be ideal, so Jarvis can stay with Aho. That would actually help a ton if that happens, because you can get the same effect with Stankoven on that line that you do with Jarvis, and then you still have Jarvis with Aho. Tony D, what's up? Can't wait to see where the rest of the elite FAs go. Elite free agents. Chance says, I've got an idea. Trade Sean Walker for draft picks and the picks for Anderson. Oh, you and your trade Sean Walker stuff. Snowman NC says teams can stay decentralized and GMs can stay home. Just send someone to make picks in person. That could be good. Just something, man. That draft was brutal. And one of the things that I'm going to show about that when I get the chance to like really, really sit down and talk about it was there was some sort of other program they had planned after the draft, and the draft ran over time and they had to show it on like ESPNU or an ESPN Plus or something. I saw the little banner about it on the bottom of the screen on the Chiron. So that's another thing. Now, if we're talking other trade options you have at center, and then I'm going to go into Ehlers after this, other trade options that you can potentially have at center, maybe Pavel Buchnevich from St. Louis. Maybe you can work some sort of deal where you send Jesperi Kotkaniemi that way. I think he'd actually be a good fit there. That's another option you have. And like I said before, Mason McTavish, maybe you can make something happen there. I think what off-puts a lot of people to KK isn't so much the situations that he turns the puck over in. I think that they just see that he can't skate very well. And that really stands out on the Hurricanes, because the Hurricanes full of guys who can skate. Pretty much everybody on that team has a decent amount of speed. And the ones who are kind of slower, for all of Burns' faults, you can't say that he's a bad skater. He's a little bit slow, but his edge work is still pretty damn good. Evan Smith, what's up, buddy? It would be cool to see Tony back. I would love to see Tony back, and I think that it provides a stopgap situation. Now, one other thing in regards to potentially bringing Burns back, I caught some heat for saying that I have my doubts about Morrow being a Hurricane in the future. But if you look at the history of players like that, the Canes tend to not hold on to players like that. If you look at, and I'm not saying for a second that Jake Bean's better than Scott Morrow. I don't think he is. But a player like Jake Bean, who has a similar skill set to Scott Morrow, even though I think Scott Morrow has a higher ceiling, he didn't stick around. So that gives you an idea right there. So if they do bring Burns back, they're waving the white flag on Morrow for the start of the season, I would imagine. So if they bring him back, then they're expecting Morrow to not make the team out of training camp partially. Scott Thomas, what's up, Brandon? Good to see you, buddy. Matthew P says, honestly, Buffalo should probably trade Tage and Tank for McKenna. If they did, that would benefit the Canes. Josh Epifanio says, should we throw a bag at Granlund to be our 2C? A huge bag, no. If it's a short-term bag, that would be a lot better. Like 2, maybe 3 years at the most. If you give him an Orlov type of contract, I'm okay with that. Anything beyond that, though, is too much. But the fact of the matter is the Canes are running out of options. Eve, what's up? Welcome to the show. Completely unrealistic, but will never happen if the Canes make a new second line of Ehlers, Granlund, Besser via free agency. I could see that. The only thing, all the defense on that line of those 3 players you mentioned would come from Ehlers. And that's the only thing that bothers me about that, because Granlund's not very fast. Besser's not very fast. Ehlers would have to work extra hard on that line, and I'd rather get Ehlers to go with Aho personally. Now, if you did Elin, Granlund, Jarvis or something to that degree, and then you had Svechnikov, Besser, and Aho on the top line, something like that maybe. I wouldn't be surprised if the Canes did sign Besser, and I'm still very optimistic and basically convinced they're going to get Ehlers. Besser's slow, but he can put a puck in the net. And he will be selfish, and he will shoot in a lot of other situations where players that the Hurricanes currently have will not. So maybe that'll finally give a little bit of a dynamic change. It'll be a paradigm shift as far as the type of players that the Hurricanes tend to go after in free agency to bring in someone like Brock Besser. He would be relatively expensive. I'm going to look at his contract in a second and maybe kind of give a guesstimation of where he would land at. But first, I'm going to talk about Nikolai Ehlers. But if that line, if those 3 players were brought in, I don't see them playing together for very long. If Kuznetsov, Necas, and Kuznetsov, Necas, and Gensel, that line didn't stay together, I don't think that line would stay together that you mentioned there personally. And I was really happy the first time I saw the Kuznetsov, Necas, Gensel line roll out, because I was like, finally, a line that will terrify teams during offensive zone faceoffs for the Canes. I feel like I've waited for that my entire life. Like, for once, a truly offensively dangerous line. And they didn't even need Aho to make it. But Gensel ultimately ended up playing with Aho, which was the right decision. One more from Tony D here. If we sign Ehlers, then what do we do with Blake? Because he won't have a spot. For lack of a better term, Blake has become expendable on the trade market out of the simple fact that Stankoven's here now. And Stankoven's better than Blake. He's got a higher ceiling than Blake. So I like Jackson Blake. I like him a lot. But the simple fact of the matter is he's kind of hit a point of redundancy, kind of like Jack Drury did before he was moved out. All right, I'll get to a few more comments here. We might have to get Besser now, despise my loath to do so. Yeah, it's looking that way. Caleb Sharp says, think Ehlers is going to be guaranteed a spot on the top line. That's been some of the word on what he wants in a new situation. Yeah, and I think him and Aho, I don't know if they'd be Aho and Gensel good, but if you have Aho with Ehlers and then Svechnikov can finally stay on the right wing where he plays better, then I think that you could maybe have something there. Caleb Sharp says Besser seems to be trending towards the Oilers. Matthew says maybe we can bring Kuzi back. Well, he's coming back over here. I mean, I would have liked to have seen what Kuznetsov would have done having a full training camp and realistically having time to adapt. I still don't agree with that situation of him being scratched in the playoffs a couple of seasons ago. But then again, we don't know what the circumstances around that were. So no idea. Some people speculated it had to do with that autoimmune disorder that he unfortunately has. And I'm not going to speculate about that because I don't know. Maybe that had something to do with it, and they just didn't want to say that at the time. So we'll see what happens. But, I didn't hate the idea of Kuznetsov staying. I really didn't. Eiley says Besser is going to Minnesota. That's the last thing I heard, too, or last thing I saw, I should say. Caleb says, think our best trade piece is Blake. Rod likes the diversity with which he can deploy his forwards, and Blake can't play up and down the lineup like the rest of the group. I agree. When you're talking about guys who can really play up and down the lineup, Taylor Hall comes to mind. Now, a lot of people make lines right now with Taylor Hall in the top 6. If that happens, then the Canes are kind of in trouble a little bit. Taylor Hall at this point in his career is more of a depth piece. You can move him up if you have to, but you'd prefer to be in a situation where you didn't need him there. You want that speed, that experience, and that extra scoring touch in the bottom 6, in my opinion. Maverick says Ehlers should play with Aho for sure. Absolutely. That's why you bring a guy like Ehlers in. I just hope Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis gets put together and stays together, and Rod doesn't break them up. Yeah, because I've had about enough of seeing Martin Stahl and Jarvis. I'm kind of done with the MSJ line. I'm kind of over that. Sign Ehlers and Besser, trade 2C and D-man. Hope so. It's not looking good right now, but we'll see what happens. All right, so let me get these slides uploaded of Ehlers. I didn't get everything together that I wanted to for these, but it'll be enough for me to talk about it. And plus, I figured out a little bit of a way to do the share screen on here, and it'd be a little bit easier, even though I only have one monitor. More than anything, I've been dedicating my time to being able to do damage report and landfall hour more often next season. All right. So the don't sue me slide. All right. Nikolai Ehlers. He is 29 years old, 6 foot tall, 172 pounds, left-handed shot, plays left wing, can play on the right, but preferred on the left. In 674 games played, he has averaged 1626 time on ice, 225 goals, 295 assists for a total of 520 points. Only 222 penalty minutes in 674 games, and that's pretty solid for Ehlers, or for anybody for that matter. So he doesn't take a ton of penalties. He was drafted 9th overall by the Winnipeg Jets in 2014, has a plus 106 plus minus. I'm not a big plus minus guy, but it does kind of paint a picture for him, and has recorded 336 hits. 5-on-5, he has 152 career goals, 37 career power play goals, 1 shorthanded goal, and 32 at other strengths. 5-on-5 expected goals of 40.88, and 5-on-4 power play expected goal of 15.257. As far as his assists go, 124 5-on-5 primary, 72 secondary 5-on-5, which that's actually a split that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting it to be a little bit more 50-50, but if we can bring a guy in here who's going to be a primary assist machine for Aho and get him to start shooting the puck more, that's going to be a good thing. 5-on-4 power play, he has 67 assists total, 32 in other situations, no shorthanded assists. So he's only recorded 1 shorthanded point, and that was the shorthanded goal. Per 60 rates, goals 1.23, assists 1.61, points 2.84, on ice goals 4.3, on ice goals against 2.3. Those are pretty good numbers. Those will definitely be helpful. 5-on-5 metrics, his Corsi percentage 53.4, Fenwick percentage 55.3, so some consistency in possession there. High danger chance for percentage 50.132, and an goals for percentage of 59.179, which lends to the 3.8 versus 2.3 on ice goal differential that he has. Next thing here, Ehlers is a speed machine. Top speed 23.30, league average by position is 22.18, and he's in the 94th percentile of speed. 22 plus mile per hour bursts, he has 11, which is well above the league average of 3.7 and puts him in the 91 percentile. 20 to 22 mile per hour bursts, he's in the 85 percentile with 142 of those, which is almost twice of the league average. And then 18 to 20 mile per hour bursts, 382 for being in the 55th percentile in that regard. That's not the one that really matters, though. You're looking at 20 and up from there. Now, there's been some discussion about Ehlers not being that great in the playoffs. To that, I wish to say, the Jets have never had a team in the playoffs as good as the Hurricanes have had in the last few seasons. Not one that's as complete, not one that's as balanced. So this most recent season is what I want to point to the most. In 8 games, he had 5 goals, 2 assists for a total of 7 points. So just under a point per game, 31 shots on goal, 15 of those attempts were blocked, and a total shots through percentage of 48.4. So that's something that does need to go up. But Ehlers is not that bad in the playoffs, as people say, and his most recent performance was his best one. I'd rather be getting him on, let's just say that this chart was flipped around and that he had his best playoffs in his first playoff season and then just had his worst. That would be a little bit more off-putting to me than him just having a good one just now in this past postseason. Edge data, a little bit more reference to this. Nikolai Ehlers has actually had a pretty consistent playoff. If you look at the chart there, the gray line is in the playoffs, the black line is in the regular season, and you'll notice there's some consistency there. Overall rationale: low risk, high reward. Ehlers would cost about $4 to $5 million less than AAV against the captain Mitch Marner, and Mitch Marner's off the table anyway. But just to give you an idea, he's looking at most, I think, $9 million a season. You know what you're getting with Ehlers: hard work, forechecking, 200-foot playmaking ability, and a speed and skill-based game, and he places an emphasis on speed. Short learning curve, if any, and what I mean by that is Ehlers is going to come out of training camp and kind of not have to be told much about how to adapt to the Kane system, in my opinion. I think he'll just kind of be able to do it. The speed's not going to be a problem. It's just going to be – the speed's not going to be a problem. It's basically going to be more of – this is where you need to go. This is what you need to do. You already know how to get there. So in that regard, there's not going to be much for Ehlers to learn as far as playing in the system. Next thing, and I think that this is the most important as far as the rationale of signing Nikolai Ehlers: career longevity. Ehlers has a skill set that would allow him to drop into the bottom six, specifically the third line, later in his career, with the cap going up as much as 16 to 20 million. The Canes can get a top six player now and an experienced one. And then later on, he can go into the bottom six and he can assimilate into that role. And that's one less thing that you have to potentially go out and look for in free agency a few seasons from now. So then you can bump him down the lineup and put someone else in there. Maybe one of the prospects comes up. Maybe you sign somebody. Maybe you trade for somebody. There's a multitude of different options there. But either way, Nikolai Ehlers would fit into that perfectly. He's a capable all situations player. He's going to get a good amount of time 5-on-5, game critical, ahead or behind, power play 1 and or power play 2. If they can deepen the forward core, that will help out making 2 lethal power play units, which this team desperately needs, and he's a great penalty killer. So there's a lot of rationale around the idea of bringing Nikolai Ehlers in, those being the overreaching things. Do some more of the comments here. Caleb Shar says, Blake is the center piece with our picks. Of course, Delaney Robo would be my ideal acquisition, but Dallas seems to be holding out. Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on that. I don't necessarily foresee them giving Jason Robertson up, and Jason Robertson is like on my dream team. He really is. I would love to get him. I don't think that it's going to happen. I don't think Dallas is. I think Dallas is looking for a way to finagle the cap so that they can keep him. Maybe they'll get it done. Maybe they won't. But absolutely, I would love to have him, especially with Nyes being extended in Toronto, and that comes off the table. That was a pipe dream anyway. Evan Smith says, I like Kuznetsov, but I feel like Rod didn't. I couldn't tell, really, because I know that, there was the whole thing about Rod saying that he liked him at the All-Star game and everything like that. And, maybe that's a factor. But Rod tends to not like players who lack a 200-foot game because that's the way that he's built the team. So I understand that. But at the same time, it's like somebody on the team has to have some offensive creativity. Someone has to be able to put the puck in the net. Someone has to be able to really thread the needle when they're passing it and put the puck in a meaningful spot so that whoever gets it on their tape next can score. And that's something that this team has lacked seemingly throughout the entirety of the RBA era. So that's another thing that does have to be considered. But I did like Kuznetsov a lot. The 2 guys that I liked the most for the Capitals ended up playing for the Hurricanes, and that's Kuznetsov and Orlov. So that's pretty cool. I liked Kuznetsov a whole lot more, obviously, but Dylan Bollinger, excuse me. Dylan Bollinger, Kuzi would be the only guy we have who could score in a shootout. That's true, but I'm not really concerned about that. I'm not concerned about the Canes missing the playoffs or building a team that wins 3-on-3 overtime or building a team that wins in shootouts. They're going to win a lot of games in regulation. Like if you're talking about a team that needs that to make the playoffs, then that's a different discussion. But I think that you legitimately don't need to worry about that. The Canes are a long way from having issues like that. Maverick says, I think we need to aim higher than Kuzi. I like the guy, but with the cap space we have, we need to pull in someone better. Yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating to bring Kuznetsov back, and I don't think it would happen anyway, but it's not the worst option. There's worse ones out there. Okay, all right, chat, here's a good question for you. Kuznetsov or Pius Suter? Give me an idea, because I don't know a whole hell of a lot about Pius Suter. The last time I really sat down and watched Pius Suter play, he wasn't in Vancouver. He was in Hell, I can't remember now because I was working all the time back then, but was it Minnesota that he was in? Where was it that he played before Vancouver? Hold on, now I'm curious. Because I've watched him play before, but Red Wings, that's right. Matthew P says Ehlers had a good playoffs this year. Yes, I agree. Cavery says, my question, should we try Granlund, the father of all Finns, as 2C? If that option comes down to it, it's not the worst one. That's like I said, a possession driving two-way game, not a defensive one. So that's the one drawback that there would be with that. I think people are, and they do this with a lot of players, I think people are dramatizing how bad Granlund is defensively, because one of the problems is, one of the reasons why defense is underappreciated and why it took literally a world stage for Jacob Slavin to really start getting recognized. A lot of times, and this is not a slight on people who do this, a lot of times people don't watch the games because they have lives and they may be working, or they have to be up early the next day for work, whatever they've got kids that they got to take to after school activities or help them with their homework or whatever responsibility they have. Not everybody has the ability to sit down promptly at 7:00 or later and watch their respective hockey team play. So what they do is they watch condensed games the next morning. And in those condensed games, you see big hits, big saves, and goals. That's about it. They don't really show really good defensive plays very often. So when you have players who are considered defensively incompetent or defensively lacking, that is often said by people who literally don't watch the games, because they sit there and they watch the 10-minute condensed game the next morning, and then they make their decisions based off of that. That like, oh, I saw this highlight of Granlund getting burned by so-and-so, or Granlund turning the puck over by so-and-so, and therefore he sucks at defense, but you didn't watch the whole game. I can't count the number of players that argument has been made against. Caleb Sharp says Friedman essentially said that Ehlers would take a blow market to come here. That would be great, and he would definitely be guaranteed top-line minutes. We might need to rely on Nadeau to be our top 6 right wing. That's not out of the realm of possibility. And the reason why I say that it's not out of the realm of possibility is because it sounds like Rod likes him, for one thing, because he considers him the top prospect now that Nikishin has made the jump. And the kid can shoot a puck. Like, there's no argument there. So if he can refine the other parts of his game, maybe he can make that happen. He's definitely got the ability to do it. So I think that maybe he's got the ability to do it. Maybe not right now. Maybe that'll have to wait until in the future, but maybe he gets a shot out of camp. Maverick says that Ehlers is now our highest priority. He would be a great fit. Yeah, I would love to bring Ehlers in here. And, there were a lot of people saying that Ehlers doesn't, make a difference. He doesn't move the needle at all. On a team that only has 3 legitimate top 6 forwards, and that's Aho, Svechnikov, and Jarvis, he makes a hell of a difference. Any team would love the services of Nikolai Ehlers if they were in the position the Canes were in. And I think any team would like him in general, just because he brings a high effort game and a ton of skill to go with it. And there's not a whole lot of guys like that out there. And the ones that are all top 6 forwards. So there's that to consider. Cavery says if the reports are true about Ehlers, if we can get him 7.5, that would be great. I'd be fine with him coming in anywhere below 9. At this point, if they throw a little bit extra at him just to make sure they get him, then, the Canes are kind of in that position now where they have to do that. Caleb Sharp says, don't see a world where Blake and Nadeau ever see the ice together. One of them will be traded within the next 2 or 3 years, I bet. Yeah, you'd probably get a bigger return for Nadeau, but as far as between the two of them, who I think would fill a need more for the Canes long-term, that's probably Jackson Blake. Cavery Kane, we just traded for a goalie from Montreal. Kuzi, name is Caden. Carolina just traded a 7th-round pick. I'll check that out in a second. Wait, my message didn't load. Caden Primo for a 2026 7th-rounder. Okay. We'll take a look at that here in a second. Probably Kuzi, because he would be cheaper and more of a rental, but the real question, Kuzi or Roslovic? Oh, fuck. That's a good one. I think in that situation, I think I'm going with Kuzi. I mean, it's toss-up. I think overall Kuznetsov is a better player, but he also didn't play in the NHL last year. So wherever he lands, he's going to be a little rusty and it's going to take him some time to get up to speed. But like when Kuznetsov really locks in, like he did with Washington in the playoffs the year they won the cup, he's a fucking animal, dude. Like, we got another goalie, 26, 7th rounder for Primo. Suter, Perez replacement. Yeah, that's what he is. We just acquired Caden Primo of all people for a 7th round pick. Oh yeah, we're making moves now. Yeah, we'll show you, National Hockey League. Caleb Sharp said, I've seen people on Twitter vehemently against Suter, but his numbers look good. Yeah, he had 46 points. And, you know, one of the biggest things that people are always on Jesperi Kotkaniemi for is, oh, he doesn't score enough. But Pius Suter had 46 points in Vancouver. Like, I mean, if you're looking at it strictly from that standpoint, is he an upgrade? And then if he comes here and he doesn't produce that much, is that an indictment on the system potentially? I don't know. So it's like, that's something that could really be looked at too. But I mean, the way that things are trending, Pius Suter might be the only option the Hurricanes have. I'm going to watch some highlights of him here in a minute and see what I can find of him. Is Primo good? I've never really paid attention to him. Perfectly honest, I haven't paid a ton of attention to him either. Thankfully, Caleb has some numbers here for us. 25-year-old went 21-1-2 with a 196 goals against average and a 927 save percentage at AHL this past season. As thin as the Hurricanes are at that position, them trading a 7th rounder to get someone who could potentially help with the goaltending depth is a good move. What I would do to see a line of Nadeau, Stankoven, and Blake, that line would get ran the fuck over, though. That's the only problem. Like, they'd be fun to watch. Then again, it's pretty hard to Stankoven in particular. It's really hard to take him off his feet. He might be small, but damn, that kid is strong. That's pretty good. I'll have to check him out. Primo basically our new 3rd goalie and will probably be the starter by December when both Freddie and Cooch are hurt, God forbid. Definitely better 3rd goalie option than Martin and Tokarski. Yeah, and Martin went to the K anyway, so yeah, I mean, and you know, let's face it, it's a 7th rounder. It's not like the Hurricanes aren't going to trade back to get it back when 2026 draft comes around any damn way. So, all right, actually, you know what we're going to do since I figured out this share screen stuff? See if I can find a good video of Pius Suter here to watch. $25 goals this season. And he had 46 points, so let's see what we got here. Give me 1 second, guys. All righty, here we go. All right, let me make it full screen here. I guess it's not going to let me do all that. Okay. Nope, don't want that. All righty, here we go. All right, let's take a look at this. Shout out to Hat Trick Kane for me borrowing this video from you unexpectedly. No, little tap in net front. Okay. Oh, wait, I remember this one. Scored against Carolina on the breakaway. That was partially because Kochetkov did something really stupid there. That was a smart little heads up play there by whoever passed that to him. Niels Hoglander, I believe that was. Definitely seems like he likes to hang out in front of the net a lot, in the high slot too. Chris Paul hits a huge three to bring the game within 42 there. Okay, let me see something else here. Oh, wait, no, I did have it right the first time. $1.6 million cap hit. Okay. I mean, I've only watched a little bit and I'll watch later, obviously, but I'm just kind of like, I don't know, man. Like, is he really that much better than KK? Is he worth doing that? I mean, I think KK needs a fresh start. I don't think him and Rod see eye to eye on things just from what I see at a surface level. So that could be the case. My qualm with Suter is he is very similar to KK. If it comes down to it, who would you rather have? If he's that similar to KK, you might as well just go ahead and keep KK. Like at that point. And I mean, I know I'm like a top 5 Jesperi Kotkaniemi advocate. I wish him and Rod, whatever disconnect they have, they could mend. Because I'm one of those guys that I don't think KK's as bad defensively as people say that he is. And above all, this is a small team, and you want to trade one of the biggest and only physical guys on it, one of the few guys on the team who will actually fight. Like, we saw what he did to fucking Alexei Torpachenko. So, I mean, there's that. Caden Prumu had a good season in the AHL last year, but overall, he's had a rough go of it. Daniel Prasley, please forgive me if I pronounce that incorrectly. Welcome to the show. I feel like I'm one of the few that actually really like Dustin Tokarski. He gave it his all every start. I think his only bad start was the Buffalo game where everyone was bad. Yeah, everyone was bad in that game. Every start I saw out of Tokarski, I feel like that he was pretty good. So let's see. Smoothly Done says, if we're thinking Pew Suter, might as well just keep KK. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking just from what little bit I see. But I mean, 46 points is hard to argue with, especially if 25 of them were goals, which this team sorely lacks. Caleb Sharp says all the Canucks were offering $4.5 million and he wanted more. Okay, at that point, if that's what he wants, keep KK. Because KK's making 4.82 and he doesn't score much, but he's got the physical element to his game more than anything. You don't want to give that up. I understand KK's not the greatest skater, but like there is plenty of stuff he does pretty well. Earlier this offseason, 4 point. Yeah, at that point, that you're damn near in KK money at that point anyway. I'd rather keep KK over Pew Suter. You know what? That's probably a good idea. Yeah, if we're going after Suter, we should just keep KK. Yeah, at that point, there's no point in making a trade and moving an asset if that's going to be the case. Maybe he will have Rob Rosie and have a career year, as in KK. Yeah, I mean, that's a distinct possibility. I think Robinson and Kotkaniemi would play pretty well together, honestly. I mean, when they were playing together with Natchez, Robinson filled in really well there. Now, that's not a good long-term solution, but I definitely think that, you know, if he's given the right line mates, KK can still flourish. I hope this offseason he puts the stick down and just works on his skating the entire time. He's still young enough to where he can make some adjustments to his skating. He's a big, rangy kid, and he looks clumsy on his skates, or clunky on his skates, I should say. And I think that if he works on his skating, a lot of those bad turnovers and stuff that he had, a lot of that will stop. Skating is the foundation of everything. If you can't skate, you can't do much of anything else. You know, the George Laraque days are over. There's not going to be many more TJ Oshie's or James Neals or anybody like that. Like Justin Williams, if you want to throw a Kane in there, of guys who were effective but weren't the best skaters, like he can still be an effective player. Daniel Prasley you're one of the few who said my last name correctly on the first try. Thank you. You got it. You're welcome, buddy. I appreciate it. My last name's a little weird too, so I understand. I haven't put it out there yet, but eventually people are going to find it out anyway. But one of these days I'll say what my last name is, because it's kind of a bitch to pronounce for some people. But yeah, no, I'll look more into Pew Suter, especially if the Hurricanes do end up signing him. But right now it's like, might as well keep KK at that point if he's really offering or Vancouver offered him 4.5 and he wanted more. If he comes to Carolina and wants more than 4.82, then what's the point? There really isn't one. Caleb Sharp says the Svech KK Hall line was cooking after that Hall Mikko trade, but then of course Rod broke them up after 2-3 games. I didn't understand that. I really didn't. I thought that line was working pretty well. Hall really was bringing out the best in both of those guys, but especially KK. E2 says, I think the best KK ever played was when he centered Turbo and Nate. Just my goodness, that line was stellar offensively and no business being as good as it was defensively. Yeah, and a lot of that was, Teravainen for, how much I gave him grief for, not shooting the puck in the most advantageous situations imaginable to the point where it pissed everybody off. Defensively, really good. Caleb Sharp says best line on that team during that time. I agree. Yeah, I really like seeing Hall and KK play together. And, let's just say that this offseason does result in just Nikolai Ehlers being added and hopefully a defenseman. If you have KK, Hall, and okay, so imagine this top six, if you will. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Ehlers, Aho, and Jarvis, Svechnikov, KK, and Hall. Tell me what you think about that. I think that could be a good, solid top six. Maverick says, I don't think we look to move KK unless we get a solid 2C upgrade. Pew Suter isn't big enough upgrade, in my opinion. Yeah, that's what it is. It's like if you're going to move KK out or maybe move Jankowski out and let KK fulfill his destiny as a third-line NHL center, if those things happen, then, it's like if you do get an upgrade there. But, yeah, it just doesn't sound like Pew Suter is a big enough upgrade to, be worth the trouble of making those moves. Tony D says, do you think we offer sheet Cooley? Can't offer sheet nobody. We need our third rounder back from Utah to be able to do that. I almost said Arizona accidentally. Yes, I think those are given lines. Yeah, I would love to see that. I think that's not the best top six imaginable. Good top six, though. I think that would be a pretty solid top six. It wouldn't be the best one, but I think that it could work. I really do. So if you get Ehlers, you at least have that. So I just hope more than anything, if Rod and KK can kind of work stuff out, if there's any issues between the two. I'm not saying that there is, but I'm not saying that there is issues there, but like him getting scratched in the playoffs, I was kind of like, yeah, this might be the end for him. And then he took that really stupid penalty. Like I gotta call it like I see it. That penalty he took in Game 5 was inexcusably dumb. And for those of you who are new to the show, if you think that I hate Jesperi Kotkaniemi, you are dead wrong about that. The kid's one of my favorite players, and when everybody else has been down on him, I've been like, no, you're exaggerating how bad he is because he skates kind of poorly, and it stands out on a team full of good skaters. Tony D says, well, if we do get our third back, yeah, if they could offer Sheet Cooley, I would be totally down for that. That would be ideal. It's not going to be the ideal top six, but if they at least get Ehlers, you at least have a legitimate NHL top six again. If you want to count KK as a legitimate top six player, I know a lot of people don't, myself included, but still, it gives you a competitive team nonetheless, especially with how thin the free agent market became with all the transactions that took place today. Yes, a Barry Kane's top six. Caleb Sharp also says he's an NHL player, but his deployment here hasn't been fair to him either. I agree. Here's the thing about it, and I make people mad when I say this, but this is one of those things I'm just really, really confident that I'm right about. Yes, Barry Kotkaniemi is on a shorter leash than a lot of other players. It seems like Brent Burns fucks up, and immediately various members of the media and Rod himself will defend anything he does wrong. But if Jesperi Kotkaniemi fucks up, they're ready to hang him from the highest tree that they can find on Glenwood Avenue, and I don't think that's fair. I really don't. So KK's never had consistent line mates, and that's one of the things that I'd imagine Aho's starting to get frustrated with, the fact that he's not had consistent line mates. So I'm at the point where I'm just kind of saying if Pew Suter and Michael Granlund are the options, just keep Kotkaniemi at that point. E2 said, as much as I don't want to lose Stahl, I've said it before, but until the Canes truly become Aho's team, the Canes won't win the cup, but the Canes also need to give Aho some help too. Yeah, that's part of what I wrote earlier, and people thought that I was taking a shot at Tulsky, and that's not what I was doing. Aho has not had consistent, legitimate top six line mates for an extended period of time in a long time. The closest thing he had to that was any combination of Jarvis, Gensel, and Svechnikov, and he's not had that lately. So I think that if, one of the reasons why the defense on the Hurricanes is relatively successful and the forwards are not, the forward lines change all the time. The defense is not in the blender so much. So they get a chance to kind of work through their issues, acclimate to each other, and get a little bit better. So I think that that's one thing to be considered there. Maverick says, if we get a legit second line center, I think KK will be able to accept being the 4C a little more. I think KK got jerked around a lot with a lot of different line mate combos last season. I think that's part of the reason why he's been having rough seasons. I want to see Stankoven get some reps at center this season because he could be the future 2C2. Well, the only reason that I don't agree with that, and I know that this is kind of contradictory because I've said I think Jarvis can be the second line center, but Jarvis also has the shoulder thing working against him with that rotator cuff being messed up. You might as well try Jarvis there first, in my opinion, but it also is going to be hard because if it's his right shoulder that's messed up, best of my recollection, and that's going to make him hard to really torque his bottom hand on faceoffs, and that's going to make that difficult, even though he does take quite a few of them as a winger, especially on the power play when they're drawing on the right side of the ice because they want to have Aho in position to shoot and to when he gets possession of the puck, he'll skate into the high slot and, try and find somebody open and everything like that. So I understand why they do that, but Stankoven could potentially be that guy, but, at that point, you got to consider, well, should the Canes go ahead and take another run at take a run at getting Marco Rossi? If you're going to go ahead and commit to having a smaller center there, you can maybe put Marco Rossi there. There's going to be a couple of questions answered tomorrow of some sort. I'm hoping that if the Canes still land Ehlers, then a lot of that is solved. So we'll see. Cupid says, I like Granlund over KK. Yeah, I see the rationale for it. I really do. It's just more than anything, it's just like, is the risk, or not the risk, but is the effort, is the juice worth the squeeze at that point? Is he that much of a big upgrade over KK if you go that route? Ile says, apparently we're trying to go all in on Granlund. Yeah, I've seen some of that stuff today too. Caleb Sharp says, Jarvis and Stankoven are all too valuable on the wings is the only thing that makes me hesitant to want either of them at center. Yeah, one thing about that, though, people said the same thing about Aho. I'm not saying that you're wrong. Jarvis's chemistry with Aho is the biggest reason I wouldn't want to move him to center, but right now I'm like, we have to legitimately question, is it a bigger need to have another center, or is it a bigger need for Aho to have consistent line mates? And another reason that I've always advocated maybe for Jarvis to be at center is so that Rod will stop ripping Jarvis off of Aho's line and putting him with Stahl and Martinook. And if he's playing center, that won't happen. That's the other thing to consider with that. Tony D says, if the Canes, for whatever reason, don't get Ehlers, then there will be a riot outside Lenovo Center. Yeah, I might drive up there for it, honestly, dude, because, like, if they can't even land Ehlers, then this offseason, this offseason's already trending in the wrong direction as it is. But if that happens, that makes it the offseason is a failure at that point. The biggest indicator of if this offseason is a success or not, if Brent Burns comes back and it's for any other reason than to save money because the Canes added 2, preferably 3 forwards for the top 6 in particular, then this offseason is substandard and it's a failure. It's just that simple to me. If Burns is brought back, it's got to be for 1, experience, and 2, you spent all your money on forwards. That's the only reason that he should come back. If you're bringing him back to stop the bleeding and to just kind of keep the team you already had together as much as possible, then the offseason's a failure. Just straight up. Caleb Sharp says fair wingers do seem to grow on trees compared to centers. Yeah, that is true. Most wingers were originally centers. Yeah, Jarvis and Stankoven, for example, were both drafted as centers as well, I believe. I know Jarvis was. I can't remember Stankoven. Natchez also was drafted as a center. And I know that I advocated for Natchez to play center I don't know how many times, and he went to Colorado, and that experiment lasted for a period. So, I was wrong about that one. I'll admit that all day long. I was completely wrong about that one. So, Colby McLean, what's up, buddy? Apparently, Elliot Friedman said Ehlers would probably look at Canes for less money for a chance to win, so at least that's positive. That would help. That would help a ton. Caleb Sharp says every team in the league is looking for centers. What the hell are teams going to do when the league goes to 34 teams? Some teams are going to be icing truly horrendous lineups as the league adds teams. Yeah, and that's one thing. Our friend Whaler Kane talked about that at one point. The expansion thing, I understand the rationale behind it, and I think it's good for the game. I know that, I've advocated for Atlanta to get another team because the first time they tried it, Atlanta just wasn't ready for hockey. The second time they tried it, the ownership group, they weren't really committed to hockey. They just did it so that they could get the Atlanta Hawks. And that, I think if you had it go back there this time with the right management, because with the right management, it can work. The store that I work at here in South Carolina for the time being, there's been multiple people coming there from Arizona to buy, hockey related stuff. Or there was a couple in there that was looking for figure skates for their daughter yesterday. They were from Arizona, and they were talking about how much people there actually really missed the team. and that they wish it had just been in a more advantageous location, and the Phoenix Suns won't share their facility with the Coyotes, because it's a lot of money to install the things you need for an ice rink. You got to have the compressor, you got to have all the pipes. There's a ton of costs that incur with an ice rink as opposed to, say, a basketball court. Or, I don't have any data to back this up, but I would be curious to see what the unit cost and the build cost is of, say, a college football or an NFL stadium when compared to a arena that can house an NHL team with all the stuff you need to maintain ice, especially in a really, really hot and dry climate like there is in Arizona. But if you take the Arizona Coyotes out of the equation, you don't have Austin Matthews and you don't have Matthew Knies. So that's one of the things that, like, when I see people, specifically ones from Toronto of all places, saying, oh, look, hockey doesn't belong in the South. Two of your best players came from Arizona, so shut the fuck up. But I do worry that the talent pool in the league is getting diluted from expansions, and I think it's too early. But it's going to be 34 teams probably by the end of the decade, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's 36 by, say, 2035. And I think that's too much. I think if you don't, now there is one upside to that. It creates jobs in the American League, creates jobs in the East Coast League, and then all the way down to the SPHL and the Fed. It creates leagues, or it creates jobs for those leagues, because they will ultimately have more teams and more players that will help the quality of play in those leagues. But the downside of that is, that it does dilute the talent pool in the league. And to the naked eye, it doesn't really seem like that much. But when you're looking at what the market looks like, particularly in a free agency like this, free agencies like this will become more and more common, where it's kind of uneventful and there's not a whole lot out there, in the event that you continue to expand and ultimately dilute the talent level in the league. For example, and I piss people off when I say this, but I don't give a damn, the only reason that Jake Bean and Hayden Fleury still have jobs is because the NHL has expanded twice since 2018. That's the only reason, or 2017, excuse me. That's the only reason those guys have jobs, because they're not capable NHL players. They're just not. They weren't then. They are now, because there's more spots. Evan Smith says the Kachuk brothers are from Arizona, aren't they? I believe one of them was born there when Keith was playing there. I actually don't know off the top of my head. I'll tell you for sure in a second. They were both born in Scottsdale when Keith was playing there. That's correct. Caleb Sharp says Atlanta, Houston, return to Phoenix, and then what's the last location? There's a few that it could be. I know that Canada wants another team, but their dollar ain't worth a damn. So them getting the Nordiques back or anything like that, I don't see that happening. I think Winnipeg would end up moving before Canada got an additional team, just to be perfectly honest. Houston, definitely. I think that they could have a team. Tony D, I don't know if you would change your allegiance if that happened. Return to Phoenix. I think that one's pretty inevitable, that they'll get another team in Arizona. If they could get it going in Scottsdale, maybe that could work, because Scottsdale's a little bit more, would produce a little bit more money, and it's a little bit more affluent. Maybe, I know that there's been a big push to maybe have it in Milwaukee. There's a bunch of different things that I guess Milwaukee would be a good spot for a team, because Milwaukee Admirals are really popular. They're a pretty successful AHL franchise. That's one place that could happen. People always talk about, oh, put a team back in Hartford, blah, blah, blah. It would be more home games for the Bruins, the Rangers, the Islanders, the Devils, and to a much lesser degree, the Sabres, if you did that. That's about the only other place that I could maybe see an NHL team going. There's nowhere else to put one in California. At that point, Texas would already have two. There's nowhere really in Alabama, Mississippi, or anywhere like that where I could see an NHL team work for sure. That's for sure. You already got two in Florida. We don't need another one in Raleigh. We're already divided enough. We don't need another one in North Carolina. Like, Hurricanes fans are already divided enough as it is. And if you think for a second I'm going to cheer for their MLB team, they're going to get eventually, you're sorely mistaken. Let's see. Yeah. Milwaukee's about the only place that I could really see them putting a fourth team in addition to the three on that list. Caleb Sharp says Kachuk grew up in St. Louis, not sure where they were born. They were born in Scottsdale, but they do. I know they claim St. Louis as they claim St. Louis as their hometown. Chance says not the trade I wanted to see. World's number one Sean Walker hater, everybody. Tony D says, no, I'm still a Canes fan, but the Arrows would easily be my second favorite team. I would also hate the Stars a lot more. Yeah, and I already hate them pretty bad, which sucks because I like a lot of their players. Eve2 says, if we were talking about new teams, I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room being Buffalo. They have got a ton of fans, but how long until they're relocated? Here's the thing with Buffalo, if in the event that happens. Now, just truth be told, I don't know if you guys stop me if you heard this before. I hate the fucking Sabres. I hate them with a passion. Ever since 2006 and all the shit that they talk, I've never seen a franchise lose and talk as much shit as they do. That being said, being someone who's a fan of a team that was potentially coming close to relocating, and me and Matthew were talking about how we actually think that part of the way the NHL realignment was done was to put Carolina in a division with a bunch of other powerhouses, Pittsburgh in their prime, Washington in their prime, Philadelphia when they were still pretty good and making the playoffs on average about every other season. That was done on purpose for maybe to force the Hurricanes to have to relocate. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. And it sounds pretty rational on the surface. As far as the Sabres go, I think that someone would step in and buy them, kind of like what Dundon did with the Canes before the NHL would allow that franchise to move. And they would give it new ownership and give it another go before that they would go that route. As much as I don't like the Sabres, I do not want to see that happen to them at all. That's just me having one of the few compassionate moments I can have towards that franchise because I hate their guts. I really do. Like, if you think that you saw me foaming at the mouth during the second round or the third round this season or the first, because all three of the teams that Carolina played in the playoffs this season, I really fucking hate, especially Washington. Like, if you want to see me foam at the mouth, put Carolina and Buffalo in the playoffs again, and you will see me have fucking rabies. I hate them. I hate them a lot. I always have. As far as like my most hated sports franchises, they are right up there with the Knoxville Ice Bears and the Phillies, and the list goes on. I don't want to see that happen to them, though. So I think that there would be someone step in and buy them. But, the Pagulas, as far as what they've done around the arena, because I know a few people from Buffalo, and they said that the area around KeyBank has kind of come back to life. They just got to get the on-ice product going. Because we've noticed when Buffalo does go on winning streaks, that place does come alive. So I wish them the best in that regard, and that I hope Carolina swiftly fucking destroys them when they finally do make their return to the playoffs and break their hearts. But at least you still have your hockey team. But with that, I seal it with a genuine and mostly respectful fuck you, Buffalo. Caleb Sharp says Bills and Sabres are what makes living in Buffalo worth it. I hate to see that team ripped away from them too. Yeah, Buffalo's a hard place to live. Everyone I know that, dude, that place is a tundra. It really is. And I'm not talking about the one Toyota makes. It's very cold. It's a very harsh place to live. Now don't get me wrong. Good pizza, good wings come from there, really. But I would hate to see them lose. I would really hate to see them lose their hockey team. I really would. And that's coming from like the world's number one Buffalo Sabres hater. Because I really hate the banana slugs. But I think someone would step in and do something about that. I really do. So that would be the ideal thing, is that they just find someone to maybe buy that and get it better, or maybe they'll come up with something. Kevin Adams has had a job longer than I expected him to. And the weird thing about it is when you look at Buffalo's roster on paper, that's a pretty damn good team. I don't see how they're not making the playoffs. 2 seasons ago, I said that they were going to finally like make that leap, and they didn't do it. And then it seemed like they got even worse the next season. I don't know how they're not doing it. That's the one thing that gives me a little bit of hope that maybe if they have a bad enough start, Tage Thompson will say, you know what, I don't really want to be here because I'm not going to win here. And he's way too good of a player to be not seeing playoff hockey. So I would love for maybe that to potentially be the case. But I also don't want to see them lose their team because I've been through that worry, and it's not fun. All right, guys, I don't think that there's much else to talk about in regards to free agency and everything like that. We'll see what happens tomorrow. But one thing I will do real quick, we'll see what else is still out there, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll call it a night. Okay, this will work. All right, so let's see what we got here. Knock that off there, knock that off of there. Only thing I hate about Puckpedia is all these ads. Okay, let's see what we got here. So Mikael Granlund's still on the board, 66 points, $5 million cap hit. Nikolai Ehlers, $63.6 million cap hit. I'm still confident we're going to get Ehlers. Patrick Kane, don't even think about it. Besser, 6.65. I'm not really big on bringing Besser in. He can shoot a puck, but Pius Suter, 46 points, 20 at 1.6 million. But if he's asking for 4.5, that shouldn't mean looked at. Evgeny Dadonov, he doesn't help. Matt Grzelcyk doesn't help. Jack Roslovic, maybe if you totally run out of options, you can bring him back because he's at least got the speed to play in the system. Drouin, no. James Van Riemsdyk, God, no. Gabe Vilardi, Marco Rossi. Let's take a look at these three right here. $24 goals, 36 assists for 60 points. Not a ton of penalty minutes, only 26, 56.10 for his goals for percentage, differential 53.30, relative differential 5.70. That's not bad at all. And Minnesota's not a horrible team, but they're not the best by any means. Goals per 60, 0.69, points per 60, 1.72. Any guy who's points per 60 above 1.5 would be worth looking at. Oh, wait, what's that say? Rossi is most likely getting a bridge deal according to Chris Johnson. Okay, so he's off the table then. Let's see what else we got here. Ryan McLeod. $53 points, only 16 penalty minutes in 79 games played. Goals for percentage of 52.90, and he's not on a good team. Differential 47.10, relative differential minus 1.6. I think in Carolina that would get better. Goals for per 60, 0.71, points per 60, 2.24. Ooh, that's not bad at all. Maybe there's an option there. Now, who I'm really interested in of these is Mason McTavish. 52 points, 38 penalty minutes. This ain't a bad one here either. I have to do a little bit more research on all these guys. And honestly, at this point, the research is kind of irrelevant unless Carolina actually does something. Because I wanted to do more streams where I talked about all these guys, but like I got to where I was working on formats for the next season and everything like that, and I just didn't do a whole hell of a lot. Let's see. Let's go ahead and remove that from the stage there. We'll do some more comments here. Tony D says, thank you for reporting the massive Caden Primo trade. Yeah, the franchise is saved. We're winning the Stanley Cup. Caleb Chart says, Kane in Detroit close to being finalized is the only thing happening in the last few minutes. Yeah, he was never coming here, and I didn't want him anyway. You talked a lot about forwards, Eve2 says, but do you see Kochekov as a true starter that can win a team of Stanley Cup, or do you think Kane search the goalie market for an upgrade, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen or Swayman, Sorokin, Dostal? out of all those, I would like Lucas Dostal. Anaheim will not give him up, though. I think that's part of the reason why there's this idea out there that they could potentially move John Gibson, because I think his contract is down to where he only has 2 seasons left. I think that that's something that they're going to I think that's something they're really looking at doing, because I think they see Lucas Dostal as their goalie of the future. And every time that Carolina played against him, I was like, okay, yeah, this kid's good. Kochetkov, I was hoping he would take that step this season, because this season I think was indicative of what you're getting with Kochetkov. I don't want to give up on him yet, but the window to say that he's a legitimate starter on a Stanley Cup capable team has become pretty narrow. He has to take a giant step forward this season. Now, that's taking into account goalie development is very nonlinear. It's very weird. Taking that into account, I'm afraid that Kochetkov is unfortunately not that guy. I like Kochetkov. I like him a lot. But I'm kind of worried that he might not take that next step. And that's a hard thing for me to say, because the entire season I was sitting there saying, make him the starter, let him get more starts. And for the first half of the season, he played pretty well. And then he kind of fell off a cliff and never totally recovered from it. Kochetkov's biggest enemy is his mind. You don't want to take that aggressiveness out of his game, because it's what it's built on. It's got to be reined in, though, and he hasn't found a way to do that perfectly just yet. And I think Kochetkov staying with the Canes long-term, he's a 1B at the best. I don't see him being the starter. Now, everybody's trending more towards tandem goalies anyway, because of how arduous the game is to play. You're talking about an 84-game season as opposed to 82, which I don't like that shit at all. I think the season should be a little bit shorter, if anything. That's the only thing about it, is I'm afraid. I feel like we would have seen that by now. It's still a little bit too early to say that definitively for sure. But the window for Kochetkov to make that jump is definitely getting narrow. So it depends on what he does this season. Far more consequential than last season, in my opinion. If he can make that step, this is it. Caleb Sharp says, Kane and Detroit close to being finalized. The only thing happening in the last few minutes. Alrighty. E2 says, you've talked a lot about... Oh, wait. No, I already did that one. I use an ad blocker on Puckpedia, so I don't see them. Yeah, I need to get a new one. The one I have is kind of trash. Nadeau is better than Besser. If that's the case, then Besser shouldn't even be considered. Caleb Sharp says Gabe Velarde 2C. I think that could work. I actually I don't watch the Kings as much as I used to. So the Kings were actually on nights where I didn't have to wake up early the next day or I couldn't sleep. The Kings are one of the teams that I used to watch after 10 o'clock the most, because I really liked what's his name? Alex Faust, the guy who called their games. Now, what I used to do was I would just I would pick a random game to watch, typically based on if I liked the commentator or if there were certain players that I liked watching on them. Nowadays, what I decide to do as far as what games I watch when I'm not watching the Canes is based more on who the Canes are playing next, so that I can get ready for landfall hour in regards to their next opponent. So let's say they're playing New Jersey in 2 days. New Jersey is the team I'm watching before they play Carolina, if they're playing and I have an opportunity to do it. So I actually used to watch the Kings a lot. I think Velarde could work really, really well in the Canes. It would take him a little bit to adapt, but I think that he could. I need to do a little bit more research on Velarde, because I don't watch him as much as I used to ever since LA changed commentators, because Alex Faust and Jim Fox are a really good combination. Alex Faust calls baseball too, and he's pretty damn good at it. But the Kings let him go, and I stopped watching them so much. Between that and my schedule of which games I watch when the Canes aren't playing being dictated by who the Canes are playing next. Rossi is most likely getting a bridge deal. 1 year, $3 million with 2.5 in bonuses in Detroit for Patrick Kane. That makes sense for that. Caleb Sharp says, only thing is anything the first tier will be just another guaranteed to be matched, and anything the upper tier won't be worth paying $11 million for. That's true. William says, Ehlers, baby. Yeah, I'm hoping that still happens. Caleb Sharp says, Pietrangelo officially announced he's stepping away from hockey to see if his body can recover enough for him to have a quality of life. That's a good thing. You know, it's like, you guys know I'm not the biggest football fan, but I can safely say my favorite Panthers player of all time was Luke Kuechly, because I loved watching him destroy people. It made my day. He set a really good example for sports as a whole to know when to, knowing when to quit. And today he has from what I can tell, a better quality of life than he would have had if he kept playing football. I know a lot of people were saying some ungodly things about him when he stepped away from the game. Oh, they're saying the shit like, oh, you're a pussy and you're not very smart anyway. Why do you care about your brain? You're a meathead, all this other shit. No, if he was stupid, he wouldn't have walked away from the game when he did. And he did it for his own quality of life. And I respect him for that immensely. So anybody who does that to make sure that they have a quality of life after they're done playing a sport, then I have an immense amount of respect for that. And I think that's a good idea on his part to make sure that, you will live, God willing, you will live longer than you will play hockey. So being able to identify that you maybe need to step away for your own quality of living, I got nothing but respect for Alex Pietrangelo for doing that. Tony Diaz says the Marner Lord's getting deep. Apparently the Leafs believe that Vegas went after Marner last year. Oh shit. So let's see how that goes in court. Williams says, hell yeah, Luke. Yeah, dude. Oh man. I forget who that was. He cleaned out in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. I was like, holy shit. Or not a couple of years ago. It's been a long time now. 10 years, I think. And I was like, yeah, by far my favorite football player ever, Luke Kuechly. Him, Greg Olson, Jake Delhomme, Sean Casey. I'd say those were my favorites. And if we talk about Braves players, basically all the pitchers from the 90s, Rafael Furcal, and above all, my boy Chipper Jones. And today it would be Spencer Strider, Austin Riley. And I know a lot of people hated him, but before he choked, I actually really liked Luke Jackson. I hate that he didn't pan out. Ethan Reed said thoughts on Granlund 2C. Love the stream. Yeah, I talked about him earlier in the show. Granlund, like I said, I used to watch Nashville play a lot when he was there. And I think that people are exaggerating how bad Granlund's two-way game is on the defensive part of it. It's because I've always described hockey as a three-fold game. It's offense, defense, and possession. In terms of producing offense, not going to set the world on fire. Defense, not the greatest. But as far as someone who, when he gets possession of the puck, makes things happen, generates breakouts, makes quick exits, and helps the neutral zone transition out, helps out on the clean entries and everything like that. Granlund does that. He does that a lot. So I don't think that that's the worst idea. I just want to, more than anything, I want to emphasize, if you're not getting a definitive large upgrade over Jesperi Kotkaniemi, the juice is probably not worth the squeeze, in my opinion. William says Steve Smith too. Oh yeah, love Steve Smith. Super Bowl 50, the Von Miller game. Altuve is my GOAT. Yeah. Get out, Tony T. Smoothly Done says, oh, shoot, I missed the Pietrangelo news. I wish him well and all the best to him and his fam. Hope he can recover and have a good quality of life. Yeah, me too. And, if he gets to a point where he can play again one day, that's great. But him, kind of looking out for himself, I really respect that. That's a good thing. And because there's a lot of people who push it when they shouldn't. And then you have tragic situations like the wrestler Chris Benoit, Rick Ripon, Aaron Hernandez. The list goes on, and it's a list that's far too long. So I really respect that he made that decision. Tony D says Altuve owns the Yankees. Yeah, I don't like the Yankees either, but not nearly as much as I hate the Mets or the Phillies or the Dodgers. So because I hate all of them a lot, especially the Phillies. You guys know how much I hate the Phillies, especially Alec Bohm. I don't know why. I just hate the guy. He exists. Therefore, I don't like him. Smoothly Done says Benoit was a tragic situation. Yeah, I like that. That's just sad stuff. It's avoidable in a lot of situations too, in my opinion. So hopefully Pietrangelo sets an example for later on. I know that Daniel Carcillo has done a lot in regards to bring attention to some of the long-lasting effects of head trauma in the game, and there's mixed opinions on how to potentially treat that situation. Now, here's one thing that I will add to it. When I was working at the Pure Hockey in Sterling, Virginia, I used to work there on the weekends as a side gig. This was actually a family from North Carolina, of all things. And this story, it kind of pisses me off, but one of the things that you do when you fit a kid for a helmet, there's a particular checklist you go through about making sure that it's the right fit, that there's no negative space, but it's also not cutting off their circulation, and that they have some comfort in the helmet, but it's still fitting properly. There's a way to make sure that the cage is positioned correctly based on where the chin cup is at, and if their eyes are lined up within the two right squares from the middle, all that type of stuff. There's a lot to it. And I fit this kid, and I remember specifically I fit him in a CCM TAC 710, which I have 3 of those. I have one that's the old version, that's the CCM Resistance, that has a different padding in it, a superior padding in my opinion. And I fit this kid in a bunch of helmets, and the TAC 710 and the React one and the Bauer React 150 are the 2 that he fit in. And he ultimately decided he liked the TAC 710 better. Some other lady came in there, and she was demanding up and down that I put him back in a TAC 910, and this wasn't even his mom or anything. So Dr. Karen came over there and bitched at me while I was over at the skate sharpener attaching. I was putting a cage or a fishbowl on this helmet for this kid. Don't remember which one, but I'm over there like getting it attached to it and everything. And she comes over there and she starts talking to me about, well, didn't you read the Virginia Tech study? Blah, 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 blah. I will tell you this when it comes to helmets. If they don't fit properly, it doesn't matter how good the technology is or how much money they cost. It doesn't make a difference. But she was insisting on putting him in a helmet that didn't fit him because it had a good safety rating. In that particular case, your doctorate degree that you claim you have doesn't mean shit. But yeah, so as far as like ways to mitigate those types of things from happening in the future, there's mixed reviews, and I'm not claiming to be an expert on them. I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything about that type of shit. But common sense will dictate if the helmet doesn't fit you, it won't protect you to the greatest extent that it possibly can, regardless of whatever technology the manufacturers try to sell you. So that shit kind of pisses me off when someone comes in there and tries to tell me how to do my job just because they're a doctor and they don't even understand the concept of why a helmet needs to fit properly and that the cost is far secondary to that. So Tony D says, don't a lot of the Phillies fans also hate Bohm? Yeah, there was a thing where like he recorded an error, and whoever they were playing against, I can't remember. They got 2 runs out of it. And they caught him on camera. He's walking back to the dugout after the inning ends, and you can clearly see him say something along the lines of, I fucking hate this place. Well, you're in Philadelphia. What do you expect? And Phillies fans jumped all over that and were like, fuck you. And, all this other stuff. Okay, to be expected. And then he played better the next few games, and everyone like kind of put it behind them from what I understand. But I've just never liked Alec Bohm. I don't know why. Him and JT Realmuto and Zach Wheeler, I can't stand them. I mean, the jersey they wear doesn't help. Smoothly Done says, gee, sorry you had to go through that, Karen. Thank you for sharing your experience and for doing right by that child in that situation. Yeah, I did my best too, because, and I know I've talked about gear related stuff on here before, because I'm very much an enthusiast about that sort of thing. It's just fun to me. It's like one of the most therapeutic things that I've ever done is I have a tackle box that's full of like helmet hardware. And one of my favorite things to do is to go organize it, just to make sure the spacers are in one box, short screws are in one box, and dome screws are in a separate spot, all that type of stuff. That's just something I like to do. And, when Pure Hockey hired me, it's like I basically told them, I'm like, hey, I just know a lot of this stuff. I've never actually worked in this industry, but, it was good side cash, and that's what I'm doing to make my ends meet right now until I get a full-time job, which currently still kind of looks like August time frame that'll happen. So that's why I'm going to focus on the website and having the slide formats for the pre and post game shows done by then. Yeah, it was just really annoying to me, but it's like one thing I do want to do on here is talk more gear stuff and everything like that, because parents get obsessed with some really, really dumb stuff sometimes. Like there was one family that was in Pure Hockey one time, and this guy was absolutely insistent that his son had to wear Bauer skates and the CCM skates sucked and all this other stuff. Now, when it comes to skates, I'm a Bauer guy. But there was at one point in time where I actually had Bauer from head to toe, and the first thing that I changed when I moved up here was I went to CCM skates. I had Bauer holders and steel on them. I had them, rivet those in there for me and everything like that. But at the end of the day, that was the year that Easton was bought by Bauer, and they actually filed Chapter 11, and their product suffered for a couple of years as a result. So when I tried on the 1S skates, I want to say the Supreme 1S skates, which are my type of fit, they didn't work for me. I tried on a pair of Super Tacs, and I absolutely loved them. Ultimately, I went the day I got my first pair of Bauer custom skates, my 2S Pros. I went to go get either CCM or True skates because I got to the point where I was kind of done with Bauer. My entire, all my gear was CCM and Warrior anyway. But then I tried on the 2S Pros at the store, and I ended up ordering a custom pair with the old school standard eyelets, classic felt tongue, all the stuff that I wanted on a skate with a modern boot. And then now I have mock customs that I wear, and, I don't think I'd wear their retail skates because their retail ones don't fit me, but their custom ones came out the way that I did. But this guy came in there and absolutely insisted that his kid had to wear Bauer skates. And I think it was more so the fact that since he wore Bauer skates, he wanted his son to wear them. And he put some, so his kid put on the CCM ones that I had him. I had him try on a pair of CCM Jet Speed FT3s or whatever they were at the time. And they actually fit him like properly. And I kept insisting on this guy. I'm like, your son will not perform well in a skate that doesn't fit well. And this kid, like he's saying, is about to try out for like AAA juniors on little caps or something like that. And I'm like, well, he needs a good fitting pair of skates. And, you know, goddamn whatever it says on the side of the skate. And he was like, whatever, you don't know what you're talking about. And he left. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, you know, there were times where I was like telling, you know, kids would be asking me what length should they cut their stick. And that's one of those things that I'm like, that's a player preference thing. Like me personally, like I keep mine kind of long because I'm more defensively minded. I like being able to poke check people, but I know that like if it's too long, like I was taking a lot of tripping penalties. So I'd tell them, you know, they go, well, you either cut it to your nose if you're playing defense or you cut it to your lip if you're playing forward. And I'm like, it's not always that simple. Like let some of these kids make some of these decisions on their own. And, you know, someone actually went to my manager and complained that I, you know, didn't know what I was talking about and everything. And I was like, you know, I gave your kid the power to make a choice. And I intently asked him, what do you like to do when you're playing hockey and everything? What feels comfortable to you and everything like that? And, you know, he insists, he's like, he tried to sell my son this expensive, you know, mid kick point stick because he was like buying a Nexus Geo or something like that, which was a top price point stick. And then they went ahead and bought a, I think it was the Bauer Hyperlight at the time. He bought that anyway, and it was the exact same price. They were both $339, if I remember correctly. Yeah, some hockey parents are very insufferable people. I've met some that are awesome. I really have. Like there were some that were in the store yesterday that I really enjoyed talking to and everything like that. But there were some of them that were just like, they came in there and they already knew everything, but they still wanted me to help them with stuff. I'm like, okay, well, it can't be both. Caleb Sharp says he was also on a 2-month slump. Slump is putting it nicely to end the season last year. So bad he got benched. Yeah, I remember that. I laughed at him. Yeah, I laughed at him a lot for that because fuck him. Smoothly Done says, would love more gear talk. Helps me learn. It's enjoyable to hear something you are passionate about. Yeah, I'm going to do that more often. I've got one video about my 2 pairs of custom skates up. I'm going to follow up on that because I just retired my 2S Pros because I'm going to get Mars Blade chassis put on them and turn them into rollerblades because the weather is nice around here a lot more. And there's a roller rink here, and I think I'm going to play some more roller hockey because ice time is expensive. And also it's like, I don't have to like go to designated ice time. I can just kind of go to the roller rink whenever I want and go skate around, shoot puck and everything like that, because I have the worst fucking shot on the planet. I can't shoot a puck worth a damn. I'm like barely Brett Pesci when it comes to that. I cannot shoot a puck. I just fucking suck at it. Nothing else to it. But yeah, no, there will definitely be more gear talk on here. I've talked about a couple of sticks on here. I just got a Warrior Nuvium Pro 2. It was a little bit of a learning curve, a little bit whippier than my CCM Tax AS5 that I just came from. But overall, really good stick. Kick points in a little bit of different spots, so it's taking me some adjustment there. Ethan Reed says, since the market probably gets better midseason, which teams do you think will likely be sellers coming to trade deadline? Depends on who's bad and who's not. So there's one really big wild card in that, if you ask me, as far as the Eastern Conference goes, and I would say that's Buffalo. If Buffalo has another bad start, then I think that they could potentially say, okay, the rebuild has failed, hit the hammer, and that's that. Any combination of Tage Thompson or Alex Tuck becoming available is something the Canes really, really need to jump on if that happens. It just kind of depends. Evan Smith says, I still miss my first Warrior stick. Yeah, I didn't have a Warrior stick until the Alpha QX came out, I think, and I absolutely loved it. But that's when I was like coming out of my phase of being a Bauer supremacist. That being said, Bauer's actually started winning back my business a lot lately. I still don't like their sticks. My favorite stick ever, by far, the Total One NXG and the Total One MX3. Those two are my favorites. I actually had 8 Total One NXGs at one point because I remember a friend of mine hit me up and he said, hey, look at this ad on Craigslist. And I'm like, I'm sorry, bro, I'm not into that type of stuff, talking to him jokingly. He said, no, it's for hockey sticks. And I'm like, wait, for real? He's like, yeah, that's the one you use all the time, because he didn't play hockey and he couldn't have been any less interested. But I love like telling people like, oh, this thing's fucking awesome. And I look at this ad and this guy, he was in the Navy like I was, and he was going overseas. So he was leaving his gear here, but he's like, I'm not gonna be able to use my sticks. I might as well sell them. And I already had 3 of the Total One NXGs. I go over to his house and I'm like, hey, what's up? What are you selling these for? He's like, I'll give them to you for $100 each. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Okay. So $500. And I walked out with 5 Total One MX3s. And over the course of the next couple of years, because I was pretty strong back then, I've started lifting again. I got to do more. I was pretty strong back then, and I broke all of them in a few months because I use an 87 flex. And because I tried 95 and it's all right, but I feel like I don't get the power on it that I would like because I'm not a good shooter to begin with. But yeah, Total One MX3 and Total One NXG were my favorites. Bauer APX2, I really like that one. I think my favorite current ones are probably the CCM Jet Speed line because I like the hybrid kick point. Smoothly Done says Tuck and Thompson for Blake, 2 Dallas first, 2 Dallas third, Suzuki and Trikazov. Yeah, man, I hate that Trikazov's not panning out, but I think the injuries are kind of doing him in. If the league doesn't veto a trade like that, because I could see them potentially stepping in and saying, no, this ain't going to happen, I would make that in a heartbeat if those guys become available, because those two would be quite literally game changers, especially Tage. Tuck would be kind of like, what I've described about Ehlers, how it's like just on day one, he's a perfect fit. Like that's a distinct possibility right there, like right off the hop. So we'll see what happens. One other thing I do want to add, and this actually reminds me of a conversation I had with somebody that came in the store. He was in the Marine Corps, and him and I were talking about, like, we're both veterans, so we're just talking about like random shit. And people are like kind of surprised by how much of a pay cut guys like Bennett and Marchand and Ekblad are taking. And one of the things that we were talking about is there, you don't make a ton of money in the military. You can make a pretty damn good living, but it's not like you're not going to be rich or anything because of it. And he, we were talking about like what kind of like gets people to stay in the military. Cause I did 8 years. I was very much considering doing 20, but the last 18 months or so I was in, it was driving me literally fucking insane. And I was like, all right, I need to walk away from this shit for my own good. But we were talking about how it's like, so he's a V-22 pilot, and he was saying the reason that he stayed in wasn't so much the flying or the money or everything like that. It was like he liked his job and he liked the people that he was around, and he liked feeling like he was part of that type of culture and everything. So when you're in the position that someone like Brad Marchand, Sam Bennett, or Aaron Ekblad is in, taking a pay cut to stay in that good of a situation is not that much of a surprise to me. It's really not. When I saw the AAV Ekblad sign for, I was like, okay, that's really good. That's a steal for them. And I totally understand why someone would take a pay cut to stay in such a good situation like that, because you got a winning culture. You'll still make plenty of money because, like, ask any normal person out there, what would you rather have? An extra $2 million a year or a chance to immortalize yourself with a 3rd Stanley Cup? I'm taking the immortality route in that and trying to get my name on the Stanley Cup again. That's what I would do if I were in that situation, because there ain't much difference between being someone who has $6 million and having $8 million. I'm not a millionaire, so I don't know for sure, but I can safely say that, like, I think that people, it's like when you're in that type of situation, getting your name on the Stanley Cup potentially for a third time in a row is worth a hell of a lot more than a couple more $1 million a season, especially when you've already made as much money as those guys have in their lives. Excuse me. So I understand that. Like, when you have a good, and that's not just for athletes, that's for anybody. When you have a really good situation and you enjoy where you're at, who you work with, and what you do, taking a pay cut is not a strange thing. It's really not. Like I said, if I'd been a little bit happier with some of my circumstances, I probably would have stayed in the military. But the last 18 months I was in, I was kind of like, if I end up in another situation like this, I'm not going to walk out alive. So that was the end of that for me. Smoothly Done says, thank you and him for your service. Much appreciated, buddy. Thank you so much. Thank you. But yeah, so that's basically all I have to say for the night. Please join Caniac Sessions at 11 tomorrow. We are going to live react to everything. Me, Griff, and AB, all 3 will be there. We might drag Sam Wallace into it. We don't know yet. We don't know exactly what the ins and outs of it are going to be, but I will definitively say myself, Griff, and AB will be there. So thank you guys for joining me tonight. Hopefully tomorrow is a little bit more optimistic of a day than we've had today, because things do not look good today, but it's still really, it's too early to tell. So hopefully something will come of it. Hopefully. Smoothly Done says, looking forward. Thank you for a fun stream. Thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate it. Have a good night, friend. Yeah, no, all you guys have a good night too. Thank you very much for joining me. All these streams lately have been really fun. And, we're in this together, regardless of what goes on with the team, even if things don't go the way that consensus we want it to go, or with one player being signed over another. We all want the same thing at the end of the day. We want the team to win. And for the love of God, I need to see Rod hold the Stanley Cup up, holding with the suit on, because we'll never hear the end of it if he doesn't, and he deserves it. So don't agree with all of his decisions, but I definitely, I don't want to see any other coach hold the Stanley Cup up next to people wearing Kane sweaters other than him. So you guys have a good night. Evan Smith, have a good night. Yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow, and I'll be doing a whole lot more over the course of this month. So y'all take care.